Hello everyone, I'm Matt Williamson. How you doing? Steelers are 2-0, same as yesterday. And more in-depth analysis here. And as we often will, I'm going to start with snap counts. And Denver's really didn't have anything that jumped out at me notable. But I do have some Denver notes. But of course, this is going to be mostly Steelers. Let's start with offense. Of a possible 66 snaps, the entire offensive line and Justin Fields played 66 snaps with the exception of Troy Fautanu, who obviously missed some time with Broderick Jones, rotating, and he played 55 of 66 snaps. Van Jefferson paced the receivers. He played 54, followed directly by George Pickens. And then there was Pickens had 51. Then there's a little drop-off. Freiermuth had 38. Warren and Harris, both 31. All right, I kind of like to see that. Austin had 30, which implies to me I need to look into this, but they must have been a much higher percentage of 11 personnel. Darnell Washington played 29 snaps. Michael Pruitt played 28. Michael Pruitt plays more snaps than you think, by the way. Scotty Miller came in at 14, as did Connor Hayward. Connor Hayward might play less than you think. Broderick Jones lasted for 11, not so great. Ben Skowronek came in at 6, and Cordarrelle Patterson only played 4. On defense, there was a possible 61. Patrick Queen and Minka each played 61. Joey Porter Jr. must have missed 1 snap only. TJ Watt played a very high percentage of snaps, considering the altitude, 55 of 61 for Watt. And I assume that goes as he wants. You know, he'll often take himself out of games, but I would have thought they would have conserved him a little more considering the altitude and all that good stuff. And that's a higher percentage than he usually plays. But there was also quite a few 3 and outs where he wouldn't have been super gassed. Dante Jackson paid 52. Remember, he got dinged up on 2 different occasions. Alex Highsmith played 49. Deshaun Elliott played 47. Cam Hayward was 41. Beanie Bishop, 39. Ogunjobi, 34. Benton, 27. Adams, 24. KZ, 22. 21 for Trice, Roberts, and Wilson. I was a little shocked Trice was out there 21. That was quite a bit. But Wilson and Roberts, much like the running backs, had the exact same snap count. Nick Herbig was out there for 17. 15 for Loudermilk, 4 for Leal. Nothing super crazy stands out there. I think it's a pretty good distribution. I kind of had my thoughts as we went, but there wasn't massive things. We will get into some other trends and usage here in a minute, though. But first off, this episode is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. From the NFL to college, BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to Online Casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slot games. Head to the website today and use the promo code BELIEVE, it's capital BLEAV, all caps, and get in on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, I got about a page and a half, 2 pages here of just little nuggets, little things I pulled away from this game, observations, stats, as we always get into. And you guys have been hitting the YouTube videos hard. I appreciate that. It seems to be a popular outlet and lots of views and a lot of positive stuff to say. I appreciate that as well. So we know this was a penalty-filled kind of annoying type game with the penalties. But the Steelers got 5 first downs in this game directly from a penalty. Denver got 0. You know, like those are kind of those hidden things that matter, you know, that you wouldn't have added up right away. Week 1, I told you this going into the game, Denver had the highest blitz rate in the league in week 1. Well, Justin Fields faced the highest blitz rate of any game in his career. They brought heat over 64% of the time. When he was blitzed, Fields completed 9 of 13 pass attempts for 83 yards and a touchdown, with a very completion percentage over expectation. His was plus 11%, which is huge. Fields got rid of the ball in 2.71 seconds on average. His quickest time to throw in a game with at least 14 pass attempts since week 9 of 2022 against the Dolphins. That's all really promising stuff. Did really well against the blitz, got the ball out quickly. Good stuff. Steelers, 16 passing yards on 8 attempts in the final 2 quarters, though. During that time, Fields did have numerous big plays called back, but the end results were 16 passing yards on 8 attempts in the second half. That's pretty brutal. George Pickens officially caught 2 passes for 29 yards, but he had a 51-yard catch called back due to an offensive holding on a lineman, and a 6-yard touchdown nullified by Jan Jefferson's offensive pass interference, which I thought was a good call. The Steelers also gained 37 yards on defensive pass interference on one of his targets. So he drew 37 yards. It doesn't show up in his stat line. So his stat line could have been way different with a few things that were basically out of his control. However, I'm not worried about this, but I hesitated to bring it up even. He's clearly the Steelers' best wide receiver, but he only ran a route on 80% of the dropbacks. I almost didn't bring it up because it's in Denver. His snap participation, as we just talked about, was just slightly behind Van Jefferson's. He's running deep routes. I'm sure he got a little more tired and wants to take a break here and there in the light air and all that stuff. But the reason I do bring it up is because this was an Arthur Smith thing with Drake London. That was one of the one of the main criticisms of, mostly fantasy folks saying, why isn't London out there all the time like other top number 1 receivers? Well, I'm just keeping an eye on that. I think this is a one-off, but considering the environment they were in, but let's keep an eye on it too. So here's some other interesting stuff with their second best pass catcher, and that's Pat Freiermuth. So he leads the Steelers in receiving yards. Okay. He caught 4 passes for 39 yards, but he played his lowest percentage of snaps in nearly a year. The Steelers had 4 tight ends involved in the offense, as usual. He played 27 out of 36 snaps, so his lowest percentage of snaps is not that big a deal. In 11 personnel. So when they were in 11 with 3 receivers, he played 27 out of 36. So I kind of misspoke there for a minute. And 19 of those potential 22 pass plays. So that's a really good situation for him. The issue is, once again, not being used in 12 personnel, which I can't understand, to be honest with you. He didn't take a single snap in 12 with 2 tight ends on the field. And in week 1 and in the preseason, he was again the 3rd tight end option in 12 personnel. So consistently, since this offense has been installed, when they're in 12, he's the 3rd most used tight end. Connor Hayward played ahead of him in 12. The Steelers only ran 9 snaps out of 13 personnel, which is, compared to last week, is low, but still. And 2 snaps out of 14 personnel, both of which were less than last week. So just something to keep an eye on. The crux of it is, why isn't he a every down 12 personnel player? I just don't understand it. Speaking of tight ends, looking at the game a second time, digging into it, I thought this was another really strong performance by Washington. Yeah, he caught a touchdown. Yay, maybe he'll catch more of those. But all around, I thought he played a really good game. Back to the running back position. On 3rd downs, even with Warren being questionable, he outsnapped Harris 10-3. On early downs, Harris was on the field for 23 compared to 15 for Warren. Offensive line, some other guys that stood out to me. I thought Dan Moore played really well. And I know everyone wants Jones to take over his spot, but I thought he had a real strong game. And that's 2 in a row for him. I thought Frazier had a real strong game. I kind of feel like I'm going to say that every week. But the first round pick at right tackle was really good. Fotanu, I thought, played a really, really good game. And I kind of look at this Broderick Jones thing and think this is kind of a good problem to have. If you have 2 tackles playing well and Jones is trying to find himself right now, well, play the guys who are playing well. Zach Allen, I mentioned to you, was a really underrated defensive lineman for Denver, and he wreaked some havoc in this game. He finished with a career-high 8 pressures and a sack on just 28 pass rush opportunities. No other Broncos pass rusher had more than 2 pressures. Allen had 8, and he only rushed passer 28 times. He mostly lined up against James Daniels. 5 of his pressures out of 13 matchups were against Daniels. He also matched up against Spencer Anderson 12 times and Fotanu 4, and he got 2 against both those guys. So he pretty much beat up on everybody he went against, but especially Daniels. However, I thought Daniels was really good in the run game. So Allen's a good player. Daniels is a good player. But in pass protection, he had a hard time with Allen. There's no question about that. Bo Nix was efficient, I would say, on shorter passes against the Steelers, but he did struggle on passes over 10 yards down the field yet again. He was only 3 of 12 on downfield passes, but for 90 yards and 2 interceptions. I mentioned Fields' completion percentage over expectation. Nix's was minus 15%, which is really bad. The majority of Nix's passing production came on passes targeting receivers aligned in the slot. Talk about Beanie Bishop in a bit, but he was problematic. 147 of the 246 passing yards came to slot receivers, primarily to Josh Reynolds, 3 receptions for 80 yards, and little Jordan Humphrey, 4 for 50. Steelers only had 2 sacks in this game, but they had 7 quarterback hits. That's a pretty big number. I think it had a huge effect on this game. And I know penalties were brutal and the flags came out a lot, but man, there were some obvious pass rush holding calls that should have been called on the Broncos, especially Garrett Bowles at left tackle against Highsmith. So I don't know how if you're going to throw flags that often, how you don't throw flags on those. And really, I thought, speaking of Bowles, the whole left side of their offensive line got abused by the Steelers pretty regularly. And I thought Benton stood out on the nose and most of his snaps, of course. This was a standout game by Benton. Exactly what I wanted to see. Another, making 2 now, concerning game by Patrick Queen. He doesn't play very big. I mean, he kind of plays like a safety. He plays with an edge, but he doesn't take on blocks. He's not super physical, tries to duck around things. His recognition in the middle of the field wasn't great in coverage. He has me a little worried. Porter played a really good game overall, but he had 3 penalties. However, he lined up opposite their best receiver, Cortland Sutton, on 23 of Sutton's 35 routes. Sutton caught just 1 pass for 26 yards on those 23 snaps. It's pretty darn good. How about this? This was Porter's 6th career game shadowing an opposing receiver on 2/3 or more of his routes. Only L'Jarius Sneed has shadowed opposing receivers in more games since the start of last season. Sneed has 7 of those games. Porter has 6. And if you remember, Porter's first month or so of his rookie year, he wasn't a true starter. So pretty impressive stuff. And he's being asked to do harder things than basically any corner in the league. Mentioned Josh Reynolds. Give him credit. I thought he was a good player. that would have been a nice addition for maybe like the Steelers' number 2 wide receiver when he was available. I know they were aiming higher than that, but give him credit. He played a good game and would have been useful here. That's a lot of hindsight by me, though. Elliott just keeps showing up. I think that he is a real quality all-around player. Obvious, good head for the game. No discernible weaknesses. And I love that the new guys are showing up with interceptions. Elliott and Jackson last week. Trice, I'm going to call him a new guy this week. And again, Trice played 21 snaps, and I thought he was very encouraging. You didn't see any bad stuff from him. I think they found themselves a number 3 outside corner that happens to kind of look like Porter with great length and height. Again, Bishop worries me. I mean, I'm not putting Queen and Bishop in the same regard. I have much less concern about Queen, but slot corner right now is easily the biggest weakness of the defense. Steelers' offensive EPA and success rate were much better on 3rd and 4th downs than early downs in this game. I don't want to take away from that, but I did think it was worth bringing up. So, I mean, what they were doing on a per snap basis was much better on 3rd and 4th downs than early rounds. Skoranek, he drew two penalties from the Broncos on special teams. They have absolutely found a gunner in this guy. He played a little on offense, but not going to be his bag, but I still think he's better than like a Gunnar Olszewski on offense. And I assume, of course he will be. He'll be active, I'm sure, next week again. But then they're going to have to put him on the final roster because I think how often do we talk about, man, they need to find gunners. Gunners are bad. Well, I don't know what's going on at camp. They don't have any gunners. Well, they definitely do now. He is legit. Speaking of special teamers, Matt Williamson made a huge hit on special teams in this game, and Killebrew nearly blocked a punt. I mean, watching it again, I'm not sure how he quite missed that. And last thing I have to say is about the elevation. I talked about that a ton leading up to the game. I think it mattered quite a bit. I just think that the second half was much different on both sides of the ball, especially defense. Of course, you'd notice it there. And I did some shows with guys that were at the game, Rob King, Wolf, Dale. And I guess TJ Watt had some things to say like, elevation is real. It was a challenge for these guys, and it always is. And I think that it was beginning to affect the game. Like, the Steelers were the better team. But if that game goes another quarter or whatever, I think fatigue would have not been the Steelers' friend at all. I believe that. Both sides of the ball. Those guys were huffing and puffing. And Cam Hayward has asthma. He's over there getting the oxygen heavy, as he should. So that pretty much puts a bow on the Broncos. I probably got 3 more podcasts between now and Chargers kickoff. And maybe we'll do a mailbag next. Something like that. I like hearing your guys' questions. So that's a wrap. Take care.